Hey folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. In this episode, we have Darrius Robinson on to again talk to us about one of his passions, DevSecOps and development security. And we're going to be talking about the divide between security teams, developers, leadership, things like that, and everything in between. So, Darrius, welcome back on the show, and I'll let you kick it off, or I'll kick it off to you to kind of talk about, what we're going to talk about this episode, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah. So, like you said, Spencer, we see it often on engagements where there's this divide between development teams and security teams. And so that can often lead to a little bit of confusion. And so I guess we can kind of start off by kind of explaining both sides, because a lot of times what happens is you have the developers and they're kind of like the golden children of the IT department. They're creating new things that, greatly benefit the company, and ultimately kind of make money in some cases. And then you have the security team that oftentimes they're kind of like the redheaded stepchild, and they're like, hey, we need to do this thing, and sometimes it doesn't always get traction. And so what happens is when you have that divide, it can lead to serious consequences, sometimes even compromise. And I think a lot of times it really just comes down to the fact that both teams misunderstand each other. And so on one side of the house, you have development. And so, they're building more complex applications. Man, some of the requirements now are kind of insane as far as what people are asking for, especially in a world where it's like, not only do we need this to stay competitive, but we need it now. And so, faster turnarounds, more complex. Something else I think is kind of interesting is a lot of times with software developers, people are going to these boot camps to gain the skills and the knowledge to get a job. Very often are these boot camps saying, hey, security, like this is how you securely develop this application. These are things to look out for. A lot of times it's just, hey, you have the functionality, boom, now go get a job. And so you kind of have that on the development side of the house. Alongside that, you also are seeing more DevOps, which is very buzzwordy. But what we're seeing more and more is that developers are either A, they're working more closely with the op team, which is great, or B, it just means, DevOps for some places just means, our developers spin up their own architecture on their own. And while that can be great, if you have a developer that knows, infrastructure and cloud stuff really, really well, but in a lot of cases, they kind of lack the skill set to be able to build this infrastructure securely.
Yeah.
It's the age-old story of, developer builds this amazing app, but then they make their S3 bucket public, and now all the secrets are leaked.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk about, for those who are not kind of in the know with DevOps and DevSecOps, give a high level overview of what DevOps is and kind of what it looks like for those who might not have DevOps really implemented in their organizations or their firms, or maybe that they do. Let's break it down from a definition standpoint of what that is.
Yeah, so this is definitely a thing that is highly debated among the industry. But for me personally, when I think DevOps, it's kind of that shift from a more traditional IT group to where you have your developers, and then every time they develop code, they kind of kick it over the fence and to an infrastructure team. That infrastructure team are, they're building servers and, basically taking their code, putting it out there to make it publicly available. They're kind of managing all of that. With the rise of more cloud resources and things of that nature, you're no longer having to sit there and manage, a physical web server anymore. It's all up in the cloud. And so you see the shift to where now developers are now working more closely with the operation and infrastructure team. And ideally, they're working together. They're attending the same meetings. They're doing scoping and planning. And it's just a little bit more cohesion compared to, it kind of being a traditional black box where neither side really knew what was going on.
Yeah. And, DevSecOps is a further adaptation of that terminology, right? And there's two camps, I feel like. There's a camp that's like security should be included in DevOps, and you just call it DevOps because security should be included and baked in. And then there's groups that are like, no, it needs to be DevSecOps. And then there's other camps. I think there's a third camp, right? It's DevOps, right? Security, then development, then operations.
Go ahead and toss in platform engineering too.
Yeah. But kind of the idea is bringing everybody together to move quickly, and more efficiently, and more securely.
Yep. So you have that, the development side of the house, right? But there's also the security. Um, and oftentimes what I think that happens with security teams is, one, they're not in the same room as their developers. It's a case where what happens is an application gets developed or a third party service gets implemented. And if the security team is lucky, they may get told, hey, this thing now exists, go secure it. um,
Yep.
and so that's something that often happens. And then also, one of the things I noticed that with a lot of security professionals, you see a lack of development skills. I think we tend to focus on, your foundation needs to consist of systems and Active Directory and networking and all of that. And that's what people tend to navigate towards, which is awesome. We definitely need that. But you'll be surprised at how many security professionals is like Python coding. Oh no, I don't touch it. Can't
Yeah.
do it. And so it's something where I will say, for us security professionals, we're definitely doing ourselves a disservice by not being able to develop. Spencer, we've talked about it before a little bit, but it's hard to secure something that you don't know how to administer or
Yep.
create. So
Exactly. And
yeah.
I think one of the challenges that I think we should talk about is developers coming into a legacy code base, right? You experienced this on a recent pen test where, the application was quite old, right? And whether the development team has been there forever and they've been the ones that created it and maintain it, or, you have a development team that's coming into a project and it's the first time they've seen it. They just got hired at the organization and they're working on it now and they are tasked with maintaining it and securing it. Both of those challenges with legacy code, legacy frameworks, that is a challenge too in this DevSecOps, or development security type of conversation, right, Darius?
Oh yeah, 100%. It can be tough because then you run into the conversation of, well, what do we do? And ultimately it comes down to risk. It comes down to money. But I would definitely say, if possible, man, there's nothing wrong with a good rewrite to get you off that legacy code
I was just going to say
base.
that, right? You have a couple options. One, you rewrite the whole thing,
Yeah,
or two, maybe you can take bits or pieces out, bits or parts of it out, and kind of rework those. But that I think is a challenge to development security as well.
100%. But I mean, I can't imagine, there's probably a lot out there of just refactored code where, yeah, it's all brand new, except for this one
Yeah,
critical process and function that's all legacy. And,
yeah.
there's obviously controls you can put in place to kind of lock and secure that as well.
And it's hard, right? Many organizations have core applications that they rely on to make them their money. That's their livelihood, their organization's livelihood. And it's not always so easy just to, lift and replace or shift, pick it up one place and, completely redo it in the other place. So
Yeah,
now,
100%. Yeah. And there's definitely, I mean, there's a tons of rollouts and ways to do it for sure.
yeah.
You can do it in phases, whatever works best for your company ultimately.
So we've talked about kind of the current state of development, Darius, the current state of security and some of the challenges around that. I think kind of next on your list, maybe, and I don't want to derail it too much, but what's next on that? We have these challenges, we have this current state. How do we move forward, right? How do we continue to progress security for applications, for development, and how do we move towards that more secure model?
Yeah. So I think it starts with quote unquote shifting left. So let's get development. I'm sorry, let's get security into the software development lifecycle as early as possible. So before you even start, creating mockups and using Figma and all that, security needs to be in the room in terms of like, hey, these are the requirements. So that way, when they hear the requirements, they can go ahead and start coming up with some of the controls and things that are going to be needed. Um,
I have
I
a
think,
I have a kind of an interjection question there for you, Darius. And
yeah.
this is maybe showing my ignorance with applications. So
Mhm.
that does, please ignore me. Or if it's a silly question, let me know. But why is it they call it shift left and not shift right?
Huh. You know what? I really don't have the answer to that. I guess part of it is every time I see a diagram in terms of like the software development lifecycle, you always see the charts. And so, you always tend to see the first step of like, requirement gathering and all that.
Yeah.
It's there. And then you're just going through the process. So, shifting left.
Yep.
I wouldn't say that's the reason, but that's actually a really good one. I'm not
I
sure.
mean, when you think about it, shifting left makes sense to me visually because of the way most people read language,
Yeah.
left to right. And if you're shifting left, you're going towards the beginning of something. That's how my brain thinks about it. But I admittedly don't know the origin of it. But I just always thought that was an interesting phrase of like shift left and why it's left and not another direction, or shift down or shift up, or
It has to
who
be that.
knows.
Yeah, it has to be that. I mean, read left to right. Every diagram we see is always kind of like that. So it's definitely about integrating it towards the
Yep.
beginning. 100%.
So sorry for
Um,
derailing it. That was just a funny little thing that I thought would be interesting.
no,
Interesting
I'm
conversation.
curious as to what our listeners think, because maybe there is some historic, like super obscure reason that I'm not aware
Yep.
of. Yeah.
Well, if you're a hardcore developer and you're listening to this, comment on our YouTube video, or comment on LinkedIn or something like that, and let us know. And we'll share that in the next episode.
But also, like I said, it's really just about designing, architecting, implementing security from the start. And so kind of how we do DevSecOps. So, here at Security 360, we do have DevSecOps service. Is we're there from the beginning, where we're there from the design and implementation phase. And then ideally, even after that phase, once development begins, we're now doing SAST and DAS scans. So ideally, we're going to catch a lot during that process. And then at the end, we do a pen test. And so I really kind of like how we do it, because if we do it right, unfortunately, it's a very boring pen test. But it's only because we did what we were supposed to do and we caught everything prior to, and so ultimately it saves the clients money. And I think this is one way to kind of handle DevSecOps that I see works pretty well. I think something else I kind of want to consider, just because it's on my mind, is a lot of this stuff also applies to ops and infrastructure as well. And by that, I mean best coding practices. So Spencer, you see it all the time on internals. We see it in terms of a lot of these recent breaches. Is what happens: that threat actor gets in, and ooh, look, a PowerShell script. And those PowerShell scripts have credentials in them. And so, secure coding practices aren't just for the development team; they're really for the entire organization.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that we see, like you said, very commonly on internals. And it does come down to infrastructure teams, developers who, request certain things, or IT admins who implement things a certain way. And, it really comes down to shortcuts, right? And it's easier to do it that way, right? It's harder, it's more work to properly secure things and use credentials securely and, do that stuff properly. It's more work, it takes more time. It's more frustrating when it doesn't work properly because you have to troubleshoot it, and it's more complex in many cases. So it's harder, right? And I get why people do it that way. But in doing so, it makes it much easier for attackers to just go in and steal things, find credentials, pivot, and pillage. So in that sense, it is more advantageous to do it the right way the first time, rather than have to go back after things have crumbled down and rebuild it all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, this is just my long-winded way of saying let's build stronger teams. Let's build stronger teams. Let's work together. Failure to do that can lead to catastrophic consequences. So like an example that I have is working on an engagement. This particular web app I was digging through the source code, and I found a host, and that host was basically a service for backup jobs for the application. And within those backup jobs were source code, employee payroll data, just all this juicy stuff, and there were no access controls on it. And so when we went to do the report, the security team had no idea this server even existed. And the developers were like, yeah, we really need this. We can't just, get rid of it. And it just makes me wonder, how much could have been avoided if they worked together. And that way
Yep.
the security team could have been like, wait a minute, this thing has no access controls and it's publicly available. Let's lock it down before we, roll out this next version of the app.
Yeah. So on that note, maybe one final question I have is, what strategies or what techniques, what advice do you have for teams that are looking to kind of improve that relationship and work better together? What would be your advice?
Okay. So this may sound kind of cheesy, but I am a firm believer in it starts outside of the technical work. It doesn't matter
So
how technical you can
so
be.
team building,
Yeah,
going paintballing together or go-karting or doing stuff outside of work, like that kind of stuff.
yeah, 100%. It's hard to foster those relationships and to get to the point where maybe the developers are like, "Hey, security guys, come to our stand-up meetings," and it actually be fruitful if there's not that relationship beyond work. No one's saying you have to be best friends, but there at least needs to be a cordial relationship enough to where both teams feel comfortable working together. And I think also from a security perspective, we have to be careful of, yes, we are the security guys, yes, we are supposed to provide, the guardrails for the company, but we can sometimes go overboard to the point to where now teams don't want to work with us because they know we're going to slow their processes down.
Right. The security team
So
is seen as the people who always say no, and instead
mhm,
of facilitating, the production of a new application or a new deployment, security is often, the one saying no, we can't do it this way. So a change in language has to be, done.
exactly. And so I mean, with a little bit of tweaking, developers being a little bit more forthcoming and inviting, combine that with security teams, within reason, kind of becoming a little bit more lax, or at least hearing people out. I think that's kind of how you get that cohesion.
Yeah, definitely. And, communication is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I was just talking about this on Twitter today about how, pen testers generally don't, a powerful skill of pen testers to have is one who is technical and can also communicate and translate technical findings to risk to an organization and communicate that effectively, right? And so part of our job as information security practitioners, whether we're pen testers or CISOs or IT admins or security admins, whatever, part of our job is to learn how to communicate better so that we can communicate up the chain and demonstrate risk and impact to the people in power who delegate and who provide resources, who help prioritize those things. So it's not just a technical game. We can't just be technical wizards. I think we do have to continually work on that communication skill so that we can, improve our relationships among teams and hopefully ultimately improve the security at our organizations, our clients' organizations, and, eventually the world.
100%.
Any other questions? Any other topics or tidbits that you want to go into in this episode, Darrius?
No, I think we've hit everything. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Good. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you got some value from that. If you did, please leave us a comment on YouTube or share a comment on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever you're consuming this podcast. We'd love to hear feedback. We'd love to hear what you thought. So do give us a comment and let us know. With that, you can find us on offsec.blog. We post a lot of our content there. Blogs, videos, walkthroughs, white papers, everything in between. And you can also find us at secureIT360.com. We release new episodes every Wednesday. And with that, we will see you next time.